Thanks for joining us today, guys, on the Swag Podcast. Today is episode 2, and we are being joined today by Tyler Mcfadden. She is the co founder of North Star Liberty Group, and she has experience consulting for NORML as well in cannabis legislation. Everybody, welcome Tyler Mcfadden.
Hello.
Hey, what's up, Tyler? Thanks for joining us today. How you feeling?
Good to be here. I appreciate you having me on and love to talk about this one of those issues that I really care deeply about. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, and we appreciate you joining us. Uh, Now, I started off by telling everyone that you are the co-founder of North Star Liberty Group. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that and what you guys do?
Yeah, of course. Myself and Kamani Jefferson, we're both young Black folks who, have been in the ancillary community, the cannabis community, for a while. Ancillary meaning not necessarily legal, um, as people who are just participating, just like millions of other people do. And being young and Black, I'm myself from St. Louis. Kamani is from New York City, and both areas are rife with disparate enforcement and really heavy police enforcement when it comes to cannabis. And so we, have seen that stuff growing up. We have both been in the nonprofit world. I was working for NORML for about 2 years. Kamani has launched two successful nonprofits so far in the cannabis space. And we just saw that the industry was, cutting people out that look like us. And the people who have been most harmed by the war on drugs, specifically prohibition, cannabis. And we saw that happening, and we're like, it's not fair that these people, these rich white folks, to be honest, are making this money off our backs, while there's still so many people being arrested, disproportionately high number of them being Black and Latino people. So, we started North Star because we wanted to really help to uplift Black and Brown entrepreneurs who wanted to get in the space and wanted to get their foot in the door in a space that's been dominated by white folks in the past few years. So that's why we started it. We're a government relations firm, kind of full service. We do communications work, we do lobbying at the local, state, and federal levels. And we also just help to do messaging and applications, just a whole bunch of things, specializing in the cannabis space, but we do have specialties in other areas as well, like tech and taxes, things like that.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool, and that's some great work. I myself, I know a lot of people who have been impacted by the prohibition of cannabis, and now seeing it be referred to as an essential business over this past few months with the pandemic is it's really, I guess, ironic and
Yeah.
kind of troubling that there's some people who are still locked up, or some people who were returning citizens who are still being impacted by the record that they have
Yeah.
from cannabis.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's a conversation that's often left out when we talk about expungements and halting arrests in the first place. Those are both great things. We should move forward with those initiatives for sure. But what about the reparations for people who have been impacted, who've had to face those collateral consequences? What happens with them? They get their records expunged, sure, but maybe 20 for the last 20 years they haven't been able to go to college. They haven't been able to access a lot of federal benefits like federal housing. They haven't been able to get a job. So what happens to those people, people who managed to stay out of prison, because recidivism rates for people are incredibly high. And having that marijuana possession charge in a state like Alabama, like, what about those people? What are we going to do for them? So that's a conversation that's not being had as much as it should be. I think that we all have a consensus that weed should be legal, that it should be federally decriminalized, and that we should expunge records. But what happens after that? So I'm glad that you brought that
Right. Now, there was a lot to unpack there, and I really
up.
want to dig into that. But I kind of want to start with your story. And I know you said that you're from St. Louis. What type of work, or like what was your background before you got into uh, the cannabis legislation?
So I came out to DC for college in 2010. I knew I was going to be in politics. My dad is really active. My mom is somebody you always paid attention to. She likes to tell this story about when she was canvassing for Bill Clinton in 1991, leading into 92 election, and I was born in late 91. So she was
Okay.
like pushing me around in a stroller canvassing in our neighborhood. So my parents have been really active. It's something that I feel like I was lucky to get from them because our school system doesn't do a whole lot in teaching us how to be civically engaged. So I always knew I wanted to be in politics. So I moved out to DC for college, and I kind of was trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to do. I know that, weed was something that, again, was a personal thing for me growing up and in school. And it was something that I was always interested in. And I wrote a few papers on it in college, but I didn't really see the space for it until a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I was working for a boutique federal lobbying group. That's where the tax experience comes in. I was doing some stuff for like Community Reinvestment Act and just talking about how we can put money into disenfranchised communities. And I'm like, why aren't we talking to these banks about marijuana banking? I mean, there's billions of dollars in the industry, and this is, a few years after Colorado legalized, a few years after Oregon and Washington. Why aren't we doing that? There's a whole lot of money for the Black community and Black banks. Who's one of our clients. We had a prominent Black bank or the Association of Black Banks, and they didn't want to touch it. And it's because Black folks justifiably are concerned about getting into something that has either, arrested their sons or their daughters, or, they've been themselves
Yeah,
incarcerated because of
anywhere
it,
where
or
there's
they,
like a gray area,
yeah,
I definitely
exactly.
I can understand
And
that.
some older folks are still really, really conservative about weed. They still believe the whole reefer madness dialogue.
Yeah,
So,
so well, half my mother's side of the family is Jamaican, and everyone always references Rastas and all that, and they have no idea like that is not like a huge act.
yeah.
It's popular culture wise, but as far as Jamaicans are concerned, that's like conservative Jamaicans. They're not with that. They're like that's kind of considered like something that you don't partake in. And
Yeah.
even like I was speaking to my grandfather the other day, he had come down with the illness, and I said maybe you should try some cannabis, and he's like,
Yeah.
no way, that's that Rastaman stuff, and
Uh,
he's Jamaican, like he's like,
yeah.
nah, that's not for me. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, it just kind of was a natural trajectory, something that I've been passionate about for a while, and kind of melded my passion for criminal justice reform and just, dealing with racism in general. I mean, it's a microcosm of how this country has kind of been built against people who look like you and I. Sorry about my dogs.
That's all right. It's all good. What kind of dog do you have?
I, excuse me. I have two. I have their litter mates, King, Corso, Mastiff, and Pitbull
Oh
mix.
wow, those are some top dogs right there.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yes.
I know you said that like once you finished college and you started working and consulting for banks, you brought up the cannabis banking, but what was your relationship with cannabis prior to that? Like what sparked that interest in cannabis?
Yeah. I mean, I'd been a consumer, half my life at this point. I'm 28. I think I started consuming when I was 13 or 14. Um, and I'm biracial. My father's white. I refer to myself as a biracial Black woman because I
Mm,
am Black, but I also, have a white dad.
society,
And
yeah, but biologically, I get it.
yeah, but I'm still Black. Don't get it twisted. Still Black.
Mhm.
Um, and my dad's also a lawyer. So being in St. Louis and having three Black children, he, had seen so many people who'd been framed for weed, had joints thrown in their cars by cops, and it's St.
Wow.
Louis. Like, I don't know if you remember the Ferguson uprising
Yeah,
when
I
they
do
came to
remember
Ferguson.
that 2016, right? Or was
Four,
it 2014?
yeah.
Man, time is
Um,
flying. That was a while.
right? I know. I think it's 2014. Yeah, 2014. And they talked about Ferguson like it was separate from St. Louis, but it's in St. Louis County. It's in the north side. I, in high school, I lived a few blocks away from where my Brown went to high school. So it was a very present situation. It's something that my dad, when I started to learn how to drive, he taught me how to deal with you're familiar with the conversation that you have with Black children about how to keep yourself alive.
Yeah, my
And
son actually, he just turned 15, so I didn't wait until he was 15. We had that
yeah,
conversation last year, and it's not fun. You know, I have cops in my family, and they've all had the same conversation with me.
yeah,
Unfortunately, it's like you have to teach them that, like, in that moment, your ego needs to go out the door because they have the power of the state behind them. So, it's not about winning in that moment. It's about,
yeah,
if anything happens, we'll handle that with the resources we have through the courts, unfortunately. But one of my uncles, he always told me that if when you get stopped by a cop, they're more powerful than God because they can kill you right there.
mm,
And
mm-hmm,
unfortunately, I've been fortunate to not have too many bad experiences with cops. I know some great cops. I've had some really good cop encounters, but I've also
yeah,
had some really terrible ones. And
yeah,
those are the ones that kind of stick with you more because it kind of checks your citizenship. It's like, am
no,
I really?
exactly,
I know what my rights are, but in that moment, they're suspended because whatever this guy's going through at the time, or
yeah.
whatever his preconceived notions or biases are.
Yeah, exactly. So like the fact that we can say we have good cop encounters, that's the encounters that most white folks have with cops every time they have a conversation with them or every time they're pulled over or whatever. And so it's one of those things that I had a considerable amount of privilege growing up. Even though I am Black, I still have, light skin privilege. I still have biracial privilege. I still, my parents were, my dad taught me the law in a way that I could make sure that I was confronting them in a way that had the responsibility in their hands instead of mine. And that's not something that a lot of people are given. So I understand that privilege that I have, but even I have all those privileges stacked on top of each other. I'm still Black at the end of the day, right? And then when you compound that with, you might have weed in your car, and I'm from Missouri, still a state that's very backwards. My little brother has been pulled over in our own driveway asking if he's exporting or importing illegal drugs. Just constantly. I've gotten pulled over 4 times in the same day, and there are counties that we cannot drive in because we know we're going to get pulled over. We know that we're going to have an encounter with a police officer. Um,
Former
so
sundown towns.
yeah, basically. But
Yeah.
the really wealthy ones, so they're not like they're not the type of old school sundown towns. But yeah, if you're Black and you're there after sundown, you're there for another reason other than what you're actually there for. You're there for drugs, you're there for crime, whatever. Um, and so that was always really present, and it's something that I feel like a lot of marijuana consumers go through, regardless of their race. It's definitely more present for you and I. It's definitely something that is more. There's a higher potential for violence, but it is, cannabis being prohibited and cannabis being targeted, and we're spending billions of dollars on enforcement. It's something that it, like I said, was kind of a microcosm of my understanding of race and what I wanted to do to impact race relations. My theory education, I was a major American Studies and sociology in college. So it was just kind of a microcosm of all the issues that I care most deeply about. And it was just kind of the direct route. Not so direct, but it makes sense. It was like a full circle kind of situation.
Right.
So,
Gotcha. So, uh, that's really interesting, and it's crazy that I'm grew up in the Northeast,
mm-hmm.
and you're from the Midwest, and we had similar experiences. I
Yeah,
didn't start consuming cannabis until college. I grew up pretty straight edge, and that was just because the way I viewed things was more strategically, and I kind of saw like the people around me and in my family who were impacted by cannabis by cannabis enforcement.
yeah,
And I was just like, you know what? The best way to avoid that is just to not deal with it. But I also drank the Kool-Aid. I believe the reefer madness stuff.
yeah,
I was always like, man, you're gonna ruin your life, bro. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you smoking? That's so disgusting. But I happen to have a couple of friends who really love weed in college, And I think I might have been like depressed after like a football practice or something. And I was like,
Yeah.
"Hey man, why don't you try this?" And I was like, "Whatever, man, I'll try it." And then I saw that one of them had better grades than me, so I was like, I must not be getting the right information. And then
Yeah.
I found people like Jack Herrera, and I started looking things up about the benefits of cannabis and started learning how humans used it in
Yeah.
prehistoric times all over the world. And that kind of
Yeah.
like really opened my eyes. And the medicinal benefits to me as well. It's just like, wow, this is like a super plant. Like, what are we doing? Uh,
Yeah. A lot of uses. A lot
yeah,
of uses. Hemp and the actual flower plant. So
right.
yeah, I feel like a lot of people have that come to Jesus moment in terms of, finally figuring it out. I think Dare did a number on all of us at some point.
Right. And
Um,
Mr. Reagan.
but man, don't get me started. But
The Big Gipper.
I don't know.
Cool.
Whatever.
Well, so after college, right, you started working in consulting, and then you were trying to convince uh some of your clients that they should get into banking. I know that it's since cannabis is still a banned substance, that I don't believe that banks can do any business with any type of cannabis distributors or manufacturers. Is that correct?
It's a weird gray area. It's something that the bigger you are, the more likely you are to get accepted to have an account. Like somebody like I don't know. I don't even know the names of those big people. Canopy, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
except I don't even. They're based in Canada, aren't they? But just like any like US based like large cannabis company, a multi-state operator, they're far more likely to get a bank account. But there are people, the little guy, people who are in ancillary businesses, like somebody who might, run a custodial business, who specializes in cleaning like cultivation centers, right? They could be denied a bank account based on the proximity that they work to the cannabis company, even though the cannabis company themselves, depending on how large they are, could still have a bank account. So cannabis banking has been increasing, but it's largely these banks and these businesses that are able to take that risk. That if they need to pay the fine, that they weighed the risks and the benefits, and they decided that the money that they're collecting through interest or whatever it is worth the risk, depending on what the feds say if they're doing auditing or whatever it is. So it's just a weird gray area. Passing something like safe banking, for instance, it'll help to make people feel better about it. However, it'll also slightly help the little guy in terms of like being able to get loans and things of that nature. But right now, especially to start a business, to start a cannabis related business, banks aren't giving out the loans. That's where it's like a non-gray area. They're not giving out those loans, which again hurts people who don't have a high net worth, which also exacerbates the wealth inequality that we see in the cannabis industry.
Right. So in order to get started, you need a huge bankroll, and
Exactly.
unfortunately, uh, there's not a lot of people in the Black and Brown community who are capitalized that way. So we're
Yep.
facing that huge barrier.
Yep.
So are there
Yep.
any current initiatives that you know of, or that the people that you were consulting with were working on to try to bridge that gap?
Yeah. So the MORE Act is the first thing that comes to mind in terms of like the industry doesn't need more money. They really don't. They
Mm-hmm.
have more than enough. I'm not concerned about them. I'm concerned about what they're going to do to help other people. That's the extent of my concern for large industry players. So the MORE Act, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, which is sponsored in the House by Gerald Nadler and in the Senate by Kamala Harris. Um, there is a small business administration stipulation in there, which basically allows for a fund to be created to help build small businesses and micro businesses. So that's something that would be huge. And I don't want to get into my my disappointment about the MORE Act today. I think we're going to have that conversation a little bit later, but the SBA provisions in the MORE Act would be huge. So the MORE Act is number one for me because it hits a lot of the marks that we are seeing. Because if we lift, just because we give people money, it doesn't mean that a business is going to be successful,
Right.
Nor does it mean that it repairs all the decades of damage that have been done to these communities. So that's why safe banking, great, sure, whatever, but let's focus on something that's going to do more reparative justice than to just allow these multi-state operators to continue doing what they've already been doing.
Okay. So basically the big guys are able to like move into states once they legalize and then kind of cannibalize the licenses, or not cannibalize, but take all the licenses because they have the money. And meanwhile, a mom and pop has a much harder time getting started.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And even, when a state moves from medical to legal, a lot of conversation is being had around vertical integration and how a lot of people that already have medical licenses, medical dispensaries can start to dispense adult use cannabis.
Okay.
They're taxed at a higher rate at that point usually. But still, it allows for the people who have already been able to get into the game in their state. It gives them a head start too.
Gotcha. I know you said that the MORE Act got pushed back. The vote was pushed back this week or today.
Today, yeah.
When was it? Was it supposed to happen this week or next week?
Monday. It wasn't on the calendar. So there was always a chance that it was going to get pushed. But they decided to push it till after November. Well, not after November, till the lame duck after the election, which I think is an awful idea.
Right. Because we don't know what could happen.
Well, I mean that, and the whole reason behind the push is that Blue Dog Democrats, frontliners, people who are like centrists in toss-up districts were concerned about going on record on a weed-related vote, and then Republicans were taking advantage of this uncertainty. And Republicans, I'm not a Republican. I don't know how many Republicans are going to be watching this. Not a Republican, no disrespect.
Yeah, we welcome all sides of the spectrum,
and that is okay.
Spectrum in this cannabis conversation.
And this is, and cannabis is not a partisan issue anymore. It's bipartisan now.
Right.
But leadership, Republicans play on a completely different level than Democrats do. I bet you didn't think I was going to say that. I am praising Republicans because they are political activists.
Very politically savvy.
They know how to play the game. And, it's been decades in the making. And now they're using the fact that they're stalling the COVID package, Mitch McConnell specifically. The House already passed a new COVID package in May. So keep that in mind. Republicans are saying we can't focus on anything else when COVID hasn't been fixed. It's like, but the House already passed something in May, and it's the Senate that is holding up any sort of conversation. The Senate and the White House are holding up conversations about this. Now, some people will disagree. That's just my interpretation. But the House has already passed something. So it seems nonsensical to me that people are using COVID as a red herring on something that, like if we pass the MORE Act, right? Let's say that the MORE Act, something shocking happens and they pass the MORE Act on the House floor tomorrow, and then they pass it in the Senate floor in the next month, and then it's signed by the president, and then it goes into effect. We have so many people that are locked away in prison right now that are at high risk for COVID-19 that could be released, and people wouldn't be funneled into these prisons for weed-related crimes. So regardless, this is not a bad political move because, like I said, weed is bipartisan. We have a majority, their polls range from 51 to 53% for Republicans who support full legalization. Now, we can't have that at a national level, but the MORE Act fully decriminalizes it, which means that states can do whatever they want without fear of federal interference.
Okay.
So people support it. Everybody supports it. And so to be concerned about the political ramifications more so than people's lives, to me, doesn't make any sense. That's just me. I'm speaking as Tyler right now, not as an affiliate of any organization.
I got you. No, I understand. And yeah, I mean, unfortunately, politics is getting in the way of something that a lot of people in America want and would
Yeah.
benefit from,
Yeah.
not only from personally, but on the governmental level as well.
Yeah. How much money we spend on prohibition? It's in the billions of dollars that we spend on cannabis prohibition specifically. Now, when we talk about how many people are in prison for a crime that has no victim, something like possessing cannabis or paraphernalia, anything like that, you can't die from cannabis. You can't. The most deadly part of cannabis is being stopped by a police officer and killed because they smelled marijuana, like the man who killed Philando Castile. So
right. We also can't negate the fact that the black market does cause some violence, unfortunately.
yeah,
Well,
I mean, that's the thing, is that when you prop up, when you have, prohibition for I don't want to let's specifically talk about cannabis. I'm trying to rein myself in right now. Cannabis specifically, when you have the cartels who are being crippled really seriously by, liberalization of cannabis laws in the United States, they've had to move to avocados. And it's something that's, a lot of avocados actually are controlled by the cartel. It's weird.
I heard about these guys, these two dudes who were like smuggling, these two Americans, they were smuggling in avocados and they were killing it. I know you pay like $1 avocado, or what is it, like over $3 for avocado now?
Yeah, it's somewhere between $2 and $3.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, any prohibition of anything is going to embolden the illicit market. I mean, the mafia during prohibition it's legendary what they were how much money they were able to make, and how much violence they caused in their wake because of alcohol prohibition. So when you have something like marijuana that could easily be regulated, we have 11 states now that are legalized. I think 9 of them have markets because DC doesn't have a market, and Vermont hasn't yet completely solidified theirs yet. You have Michigan, Illinois, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Alaska, Massachusetts, Maine. And Maine's starting their sales soon, which is exciting because it's been like 6 years. So when you have that, you have the ability to regulate it so that it's safe. That's the main concern of the illicit market, is that it's unsafe. So whether it's violence or whether it's you can't test for heavy metals, it's something that people are going to keep consuming cannabis regardless of what the law is. We've seen that the war on drugs, specifically cannabis prohibition, has not had a dent in the amount of weed that people smoke. It hasn't done anything. It's just wasted taxpayer money and made people more unsafe. It makes no sense socially. Economically even doesn't make any sense.
Right. Well, now I heard you mentioned that you used to work for NORML.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about NORML? I had some experience with them in the past, and I just thought that they were a great organization that people should know about. Some of those guys were some of the OGs and helping people learn more about cannabis and helping it get to where it is today. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience with them and the type of work that you did?
Yeah, absolutely. NORML is 50 years old this year. They were founded in 1970 by Keith Stroop, Keith is actually still working with NORML. He's like mostly doing legal counseling. So if you call the NORML office with a legal question, he's going to be the one you talk to.
Okay. I think I met Keith once at a cannabis industry meetup in New York, in Manhattan.
Yeah.
He's a cool guy.
He's a jet setter. He is a jet setter. The man is like Keith Richards. Like he just keeps going. But
he looks a lot healthier than Keith.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm nuts. Keith, if you're watching this, sorry.
You're the man, but
Um,
We can see the miles.
yeah, no, he's got a storied history, much like NORML. And so they've been around for 50 years. They're actually the oldest consumer-focused marijuana organization in the country. So basically, where the marijuana industry, where the consumer, the laws and legislation, all that stuff, that's partly, if not at all, due to NORML. And so I was there for about 2 years, and I focused mostly on the Northeast, doing some political work, a little bit of lobbying, just reaching out to our grassroots network in the Northeast. I focused a lot on Delaware, focused a little bit on Maryland, focused a lot on New Jersey, New York. So mostly that area, a little bit of Connecticut as well. And just working with, the grassroots groups there. NORML has chapters in states across the country. Like New York has, maybe 3 or 4 chapters. They've got like a chapter in New York City. They have a chapter, outside the city. There's a lot of chapters in New York. So like just basically working with them to try to figure out, making sure, that they are in line with the national view. Making sure that they are not using messaging that is against national NORML's view about things. Like we are very particular, I'm speaking like I'm still there. We are very particular about the way that we're messaging and framing things, because NORML is essentially also a bipartisan organization, because weed is bipartisan. So just making sure, and depending on the state, like Virginia, for instance, worked very closely with people in Virginia. JM is the executive director, and they were also doing development stuff for national. So working with Virginia, JM's messaging in Virginia is far different from messaging in New York, because Virginia and New York are very different states. So it was particular to what their state legislature looked like, what the social, political climate was like. So it was kind of just juggling a whole lot of things at the same time, and it was really interesting and crazy, but I loved it. Love the people at NORML. They're amazing.
That's cool. So you mentioned you were doing a lot of work in the Northeast. I was raised in New Jersey, and I from what I know, it used to be one of the worst states as far as the penalties for cannabis. And I know there's been a strong push to kind of decriminalize cannabis here. What were some of the barriers that you had to overcome with trying to get that pushed here?
New Jersey. So go ahead.
We have medical cannabis right now, but recreation kind of seems a little far off.
Yeah.
So, just tell us a little bit about your experience in dealing with New Jersey.
Yeah, New Jersey is a beast of its own. It is such an odd place. In terms of like how they passed expungement last year without passing decriminalization. Don't quite understand, the order of that when you're still arresting people and then have to expunge their records later. Doesn't quite make sense.
That creates more work for the state and costs more money.
Yeah, it doesn't quite make sense. There are basically 2 camps amongst the Democrats in New Jersey that have made it very difficult to legislatively legalize. There is a ballot measure in New Jersey in November, and heads up for any New Jersey voters watching, the question is going to be on the back of the ballot, so turn the ballot over and vote yes, please. Right. And so New Jersey is going to do a ballot measure. They kind of just kicked the can down the road. The legislators didn't want to touch it because there were a lot of Republicans who saw a no vote as a political minefield, as they should. And there were a lot of Democrats who were still kind of on the decriminalization train, like Senator Ron Rice, older Black guy. I cannot remember. I think he's from, Camden, or he's from somewhere in northern New Jersey, somewhere up there, a city. And
Camden South.
Oh, so not Camden. Sorry.
Yeah.
He's from northern New Jersey.
Some of the North Jersey cities, you got like Newark, Patterson, Jersey City, any of those?
I don't think he's that far north?
I
I
should know
cannot.
my senators, but I don't.
Ron Rice is an old guy, and he subscribes to the old reefer madness type conversation. And he wanted to decriminalize, but make people who are caught with weed take mandatory, go to mandatory substance abuse, which is,
That
it kind
doesn't
of
make
goes
sense.
against the science. Sorry?
Right. That doesn't make sense
No,
to
it
me, at
makes no
least,
sense.
from what I've read about cannabis
Yeah,
and addiction.
yeah. Chemical addiction with cannabis is incredibly rare. It's incredibly rare. It's something that when you're addicted to weed, it's usually because you're using it to cope with something underlying,
Right.
really.
Yeah, like
Um,
anything can become a habit, but
exactly.
an
Exactly. You do it
addiction is
enough, it's
something
a
that's
habit.
chemically, I guess, involved in your body and a
Yeah.
dependency or something like that.
Yeah. It's very low. It's very hard to get actually chemically addicted to marijuana. I'm not a scientist. I don't even know if it is. I'm sure it's, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Google actual studies. Or go to NORML.org. They've got a whole bunch of studies. They collect legitimate scientific sources.
There we
They're
go.
very, very careful. Yeah. So NORML.org, they've got a whole bunch of
Very pro
information.
science.
Yeah. So there were those two facets of New Jersey legislature. Someone like Jamal Hawley, who was very much on board with making common sense reform, and then you have somebody like Ron Rice, both of whom are Black. The very different generational, understandings of marijuana and the social ramifications of those. So like Ron Rice, for instance, said that he thought that a bunch of sex stores were going to pop up if you legalized weed. I don't understand the correlation between the two, but it's one of the
Why does it even matter? It's none of your business if there was. If there was
exactly,
an entrepreneur who
exactly,
wanted a sex shop, let them do them.
exactly, exactly. So it kind of
Right.
shows the generational divide, if you will, because he is fairly old. I think he's close to 80 years old, give or take.
Okay.
And Jamal Hawley is maybe mid 30s.
I love to see the county that he represents and see how the Black and brown people were affected by
Yeah,
the prohibition there, because you always get caught on that Democratic hook about who you
exactly.
should and shouldn't vote for. But these things that are impacting our lives daily,
Yeah,
we can't get a consensus on where to move. So I
yeah,
think that's
exactly.
important.
And so he's using, it's like for to his credit, he does believe that prohibition harms Black and brown communities. He understands that part. It's just this space between decriminalization and legalization is where he gets lost. It's actually similar to Joe Biden. Um, he repeated the same kind of refrain that we need to put people in mandatory rehab for weed related charges, which is incredible to me. Not going to go down the rabbit hole that is Joe Biden, but it's a very common understanding amongst older people who are relatively liberal in their idea of weed for their age, but where we are as a society, they're still very conservative.
Gotcha. So everybody who heard that, if Ron Rice represents you, you need to contact him
Yeah.
via email or phone call to help move the
Yep.
needle a little bit, or make sure you turn over that ballot and vote.
Yes. And Jersey, the ballot question does not have a market attached to it. So even if the ballot measure passes, they're still going to have to take it to the legislature next year and decide what the market is going to look like. So that's a time where you can definitely use your voice, reach out to your representatives and your senators to make sure that the market is equitable, that it's fair, and that there's a very clear path to people who might have been in the illicit market as business people, and moving into the legal market to make sure that they can still make a living doing the things that they've been doing for however long they've been doing it.
I think that is such an interesting topic, because those people who have been doing that,
Mm-hmm.
they have an entire network
Exactly.
that I'm sure, even when legalization for everyone else, recreational, becomes a thing, those people still could possibly be underserved which is
Yeah.
going to force them to stay in the black market.
Yeah.
So is there a lot of talks about helping those people legitimize their business and or actually partnering with a bigger company to kind of, I guess maybe like a externship type thing or business development?
Yeah, so two answers to that. No, people aren't talking near enough about it, mostly because people still have the idea of criminality in their mind. If somebody is selling weed out of their house and just, a few miles away across the state line, there is a white dude making millions of dollars for doing the same thing. Um, the idea of a criminal becomes completely subjective at that point. And there's a lot of legalization, even in the hemp side, that says that you cannot be involved in the industry. Legislation, not legalization. There's a lot of legislation that says if you have a marijuana related charge, you can't be involved in the industry at all, which
That's
is
terrible.
ridiculous. Yeah, they continue to put barriers in front of people when we should be empowering them. So second to that, the industry, I don't have much faith in most of the companies. I think that, they continue to go in and swoop into people or use Black people to get a social equity license. They might take a Black dude and be like, hey, be on our board. And then there's 16 other white folks on the board. Black dude doesn't really have much say in it at all, but he has enough say in it that this company gets a license and they get to take advantage of his Blackness.
Everyone counts though. We'll take
Yeah, I mean,
definitely take one, but we definitely need more.
yeah, and if you're not privy to the final decision making, how much stake do you really have? Are you just making some money? What does that really do, apart from maybe padding one guy's bank account? And then also, Blackness is not homogenous. So when you bring in these Black folks, they might not be from a marginalized community. Their Blackness doesn't necessarily mean that they were impacted. They're more likely to be impacted, but it doesn't mean it could be like an OJ situation where I'm not Black, I'm OJ. Could be like that too.
Or you could have grown up in Englewood, New Jersey, or Silverville, New Jersey. It's completely different from Camden, New
Yeah,
Jersey, or Patterson. So I
yeah. It's like
understand.
giving me a license versus my mom who grew up in East St. Louis. It's not the same thing.
Right. Cool. Now, I kind of wanted to ask you one more thing about NORML. For
Yeah.
people who might want to get involved in an organization like NORML, what type of work do they have their volunteers do?
So again, there's chapters across the country. New Jersey NORML, I am actually on the board of New Jersey NORML because I was working so closely with Charlana Mcfadden, who is the executive director. She's working on building out the chapter right now. If anybody in New Jersey is interested in being involved, we can definitely, are you gonna give my contact information, Chris?
Yeah, I'll add that at the end so people can
Okay,
find
great,
it or in the description of the podcast or YouTube
perfect.
video.
Okay,
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah, just hit me up. I can connect you with Charlana, and so that you can help us move the needle, especially before November. But depending on what state you live in, you can just go to normal.org and just look at the chapters list, and that way you have access to every chapter. You can see, like Texas NORML, I think might only be one Texas NORML, but like in New York, for instance, there are several. So it depends on which chapter you want to be involved in, depends on where in the state you live. So just visit NORML and you can look at the chapters. They've got the whole list.
got you. Thank you for that information. I appreciate that. Okay. So I know you were saying that some of the restrictions on people were who have a conviction for cannabis with is still impacting their lives, like they can't go to school or benefits
Yeah.
or get like certain housing. I don't think a lot of people know about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was one of the things that the Clinton administration did, I believe, with the drug convictions, where you
It could
can't get a
be.
Pell Grant if
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
if you had a cannabis conviction.
Mm-hmm.
How
Yep.
Would you say that had a huge impact on a lot of people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're called collateral consequences. That's a legal term for them. So every person who has a criminal record has some sort of collateral consequence to that record, or to the crime, the alleged crime, whatever it is they did or didn't do. There's always going to be a list of collateral consequences, and it's sometimes specific to the crime. But drug crimes and cannabis crimes are really niche when it comes to collateral consequences, because you'll have some collateral consequences and not others. But a lot of it has to do with, like, you could lose custody of your kids, you could lose your housing, you could, again, like I said, not be able to get, funding to go to college. You could, not getting a job is something that's not just specific to drug offenders, quote unquote. So it's something that touches a lot of people's lives. And for instance, like drug driving, right? If you are a cannabis patient, for instance, we know that inebriation is not the same as testing positive. You could have smoked cannabis, even medical patient or non-medical patient, right? Like, we know that the more weed you consume, we know that your tolerance gets higher, which means that your blood alcohol, your THC levels in your blood could be high, but it doesn't necessitate that you have, been impaired, right? So if you're pulled over and you're a medical patient and you smoked weed 4 hours ago, you might not be inebriated, but you could be taken in and charged with drug driving. If you had a child in the car, that's child endangerment. You could lose your child. It's just a whole list of things that is not, it's scary. Really, it's scary for a lot of people. It's affected a lot of people's lives, and lifting federal prohibition could do a lot, especially when somebody's driving across state lines. It could do a lot to help people to kind of gain their lives back, or make sure that people don't have to suffer those consequences in the first place.
I got you. So are they testing people's bloods at the station, or do they have like a way of testing you on site?
It's weird. They're still trying to figure it out. Like, they have some programs where they teach cops how to, you know, test inebriation on site. So it's kind of like a, walking in a straight line type situation for alcohol.
Okay.
They're developing.
I know a lot of athletes
Oh yeah, and
played their
I don't think
sports
they do the straight line thing.
while they were medicated. So I
Yeah,
don't know if
yeah. It's
if that's a very
it's not.
efficient way of
It's
testing
not.
people. Yeah.
It's not. And again, impairment is subjective, because it's not really based on a number. So you can't really test for it. It's something that a lot of companies, especially in like legal states, there are new applications that you can, like, when you clock into your job, especially if you're working like a construction job or something where you have to work heavy machinery, they
Mhm.
test for any type of impairment. So if you're hungover, if you have a bad headache, if you drank too much caffeine or you didn't have your coffee, they're playing these like games, and basically they have your baseline, and then they test your impairment every single day before you get on the job. So it's not specific to marijuana, it's specific to every type of impairment, any
Right.
cognitive impairment that you have. So because you can't test for impairment for weed, it's impossible, scientifically impossible. People are having to figure out more of how to really test for impairment. And, for places that say, oh, like AAA likes to say weed, or we've seen crashes related to THC rise in our states, legal states. That might be true because A, they're just now testing for it in blood. And B, again, you could be a medical patient. You can smoke 5 joints a day and not be impaired, right? Or you can be a 14-year-old, or not 14, no one drives at 14. You could be a 16-year-old who just smoked weed for the first time and got behind the wheel of a car. That's a problem.
Right.
That's an absolute problem. And I'm not advocating that people drive stoned. I'm not. But impairment is subjective. We need to have an honest conversation about what that looks like.
Gotcha. Yeah. Hopefully, I won't run into any 16-year-olds.
Yeah. No, I don't want to. I don't
Happens
want
though.
that either. Even
Yeah.
any 16-year-old on the road, I don't even want to deal with them.
Right. So you're living in DC. I know they have like a very interesting uh, cannabis culture and I guess legislation that they have in effect there. Could you tell people a little bit about that? Because I don't think a lot of people know like
Yeah, yeah. DC's
how
odd.
interesting it is. Yeah.
Yeah, DC is odd because it is not a state. Despite the fact that we have over 700,000 people who live here, which is more than Vermont and Wyoming, I believe, is those two states. So we have one non-voting member, Eleanor Holmes Norton. We technically have a senator, but they don't even have an office on the Hill. So we don't have a vote in Congress, not a single one. So because we're not a state and because we don't have that representation, DC is not able to do anything with our money, our own money, which, by the way, we pay more in federal income taxes per capita than any state in the country. So it's not like we're not, we
You're
don't
paying
have
your fair
this.
share.
Yeah, exactly. And on our license plates, it says taxation without representation on the bottom of them. So it's a very common cry in DC. So because we are not allowed to spend money the way we want to, Congress has the right to tell us we can't do whatever we want to do. So Initiative 71 passed in 2014, November 2014. Yes. Wait. Yeah, November 2014. And which basically said that possession, cultivation of marijuana for personal use was legal. However, we are not able to create a market because Andy Harris, who is a congressman from Maryland, decided that he wanted to subjugate DC further and not allow us to do what we wanted to do as voters. So the Harris rider has been put into the appropriations budget on the Hill every year since we passed legalization. It was left out of the House appropriations bill last year, but the Senate put it in. So basically, like you said, the culture, we have a lot of pop-ups, we have a lot of gray area, kind of technically illegal marijuana shops. We have delivery stores where like you pay $50 for a juice and they bring you an eighth of weed with the juice.
Okay, so you're basically saying they can't sell weed. They can
Yeah.
sell products and gift you weed. Is that kind of sounds like what I'm hearing? Okay.
It's not legal entirely. So it's not, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I also know that, I have a contact at the council that says all the time it is not legal. But you can do it. I've done it.
I also see there's a lot of like weed parties too, or like
Yeah, pop-ups, what
gotcha.
I call them. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of that stuff just because like the culture in DC is, this is Chocolate City. Like the culture here is very much, we do what we want. We treat ourselves as a state. It's just we don't have that representation. So with that being said, HR 51 was the DC Admission Act that was passed on the House floor a few months ago, which would make DC a state, which then would allow for us to have our own legal marijuana market.
Okay.
So call your senators and support, I don't know what the Senate number for that bill is, but support the DC Admission Act, DC statehood. Also, DC Vote is a great organization that works on that.
Okay. So what's the argument behind not making DC a state? Was it something that Thomas Jefferson wrote or something like that?
No, well, technically, yeah, it's in the Constitution. I don't think DC voted for president for the first time in the 70s, like 1970s.
Oh wow.
DC was established as a federal enclave, but it grew far more than the founding fathers thought it was supposed to or thought it would, just like the country. I mean, the country expanded 3 times over from
Right.
when the Revolutionary War started. So it's something that constitutional argument is just what people hide behind, in my opinion, to hide racist ideals, because DC was the first majority Black city in the country. And Chocolate City is its nickname. It unfortunately is not majority Black anymore. Well, not necessarily, unfortunately. There's a whole lot of people from across the world that live here. So it's not necessarily an unfortunate thing. But, you know, I
I
still
guess you're
call
kind
it.
of implying that the way it's changed wasn't, I guess, the best.
No, well, gentrification is crazy here. It is. It's kicking a whole bunch of people out. Um, but no, the way it's changed is there's a lot of there's a really, really colorful community here, which is fantastic. I think it's not just a bunch of like white hill staffers that move here. There's a whole lot of them. But you know, it's very, very colorful here. There's a whole lot of people from a whole lot of different places around the world, which is amazing. But
As long as
DC
they
is
still got half and half and mambo sauce, and and somebody's playing go-go.
yeah. Oh God, all the time, all the time. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna say my opinions on go-go music because
Yeah, it just lets me know where I'm at, and I can
yeah. Oh
appreciate
yeah.
that.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah, and I,
all
I
that
love
being
live. I
said,
love live music as well. So
yeah. Well, there you go. Go
yeah.
go. All that being said, though, I mean, DC is also like 93% Democratic. Um, so they don't want Republicans do not want two Democratic senators, right?
Right.
They don't want Eleanor Holmes Norton. She's a Democrat. She's the rep, but again, she doesn't have a vote. And I think that if they admit DC, they're going to have to really have a serious conversation of the way that they subjugate places like Puerto Rico or Guam or any of our other, territories. DC essentially is a territory on U.S. soil, like on, in the what is it, continental United States, which is crazy. We're like the Vatican in Italy,
Right.
just with way more people.
So, is there talks of legalization in the U.S. territories?
Guam just passed. U.S. Virgin Islands and Guam just passed some pretty serious legislation last year. I can't remember which was which, but one was the medical, and I believe one was recreational or adult use. Puerto Rico, I believe, is on the way. Puerto Rico is weird because I think the younger generation is very liberal and the older ones are a little bit more conservative. But you have a country like Mexico who has vowed to legalize this year. They almost did it last year, but they ran out of time.
Gotcha.
It's really just a domino effect. It's just eventually it's gonna happen.
Right.
So
Yeah, man. Um, it's not a U.S. territory, but Jamaica missed out on billions and billions of dollars
yeah,
by following the
colonialization, man.
U.S. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
They could have
colonialization.
they could have changed that island by legalizing cannabis
Yeah,
before everyone else did. Now they're
yeah.
just kind of jumping in, and I feel like it's way too late.
They were under British rule until when?
I'm going to get a lot of hate, but I'm pretty sure it was 1965.
Oh wow, it's a pretty recent.
Yeah, it's very recent. Yeah,
Crazy.
but they are still, uh, they. It's basically like they're like a puppet government to the Queen, so they still can't do what they want. Yeah, even though they're
There's
independent.
yeah, there's a
And the
country
hate
that's
in the comments, but that's the truth. Everybody knows it.
we're anti-colonialization over here.
Yeah. So cool. So like, where do you see cannabis going as far as the rest of the states following suit in the next couple of years with medical legalization and recreational legalization?
Well, I guess it depends on what happens in the Senate in November. Because if Democrats manage to keep the House, if they manage to take the Senate, and if by some miracle Biden beats Trump, then I would say that the future for federal decrim is high. And it's something that could happen. We are already trying to nail down some Senate sponsors for the MORE Act next year if Kamala Harris ends up being the VP. So the MORE Act is already going to be reintroduced.
Shout out to Jamaica.
It's already going to be reintroduced, so we're not concerned about that. Most of the Northeast is going to be serious about legalizing. Vermont is finalizing their market soon. Rhode Island, their governor, she is very much supportive of legalization. New Hampshire is the weird outlier. Governor Sununu is bane of my existence sometimes. He is very conservative when it comes to weed. Connecticut could get knocked down to New Jersey, depending on what happens in November. And New York, you know, most of the Northeast could be legal in the next year or two. As far as medical, I mean, there's still 16, 17 states that don't have a serious operating medical marijuana market. Like, there's a few states that only have CBD, which is odd. And there's a few states that have a fully legal medical market, but they don't either allow smokable flower or they have a very, very limited qualifying conditions list. So there's a lot
New
of
Jersey is one of those states where it has to be like, you have basically like your life's at risk, basically. So like cancer,
You said
autoimmune
Jersey?
diseases. Yeah.
Oh, Jersey just passed last year they passed, I can't remember the kid's name, but it was Bill 10, Assembly Bill 10, that really expanded the medical marijuana market in New Jersey.
Dope.
Yeah, so it's growing, and there's definitely movement, you know, in that regard. I think that South Dakota, I believe, has a ballot measure for medical marijuana. North Dakota is going to try for legalization again in 2022. So you just have like a few places in the Midwest and then most of like the deep South that are still having issues, which is to be expected.
Gotcha. So I know you're saying that the industry is kind of dominated by the majority population of the country, which is white folks. How can Black folks who are interested in cannabis get into the industry or get involved? Where do you see there being the most opportunity?
Yeah, I would say forget about cultivation, dispensaries, processing. Don't even bother with that stuff. That stuff costs, in some places it'll cost you $1 million to get a cultivation operation started. Those are really, dispensaries are the cheapest ones to start, but they're the most expensive long term, especially because we haven't reformed our tax structure. 280E is going to be an issue, especially for, well, it already is an issue for marijuana related companies, because they cannot get tax breaks on advertising and things of that nature that a lot of other companies get. But dispensaries, are so many and so many of them fail. I would definitely say start a security company, start a transportation company, go after a transportation license, go after those ancillary businesses that aren't plant touching, but still, you know, are in high demand. And some of them, you know, require licenses, but they're cheap. I mean, if you could buy one semi truck, right, you can start a transportation company. You just need to get a license for it first. So I would definitely say these ancillary businesses are a good way to go, because you can also grow out that way and expand outside of cannabis too. It doesn't have to be specifically cannabis, just because the industry has kind of made it the way that they're going to make it, in a way that's most beneficial to them. And get political too. It's a major, major thing. We need people's voices in the conversation around equity, because right now it's just a bunch of well-meaning nonprofits like NORML, like Drug Policy Alliance, people that are working for the people, but, you know, at the state level, at the local level, there aren't people who are going out and saying, we need this to be an equitable market, because the industry is dominating that conversation. So I would say those two things, ancillary businesses and get political, is the two best ways to get involved in the industry.
Great. Well, thank you. I really appreciate your insight. You dropped a lot of gems today. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can visit us online at northstarliberty.com. You can reach me via email at tyler@northstarliberty.com. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. We haven't been posting that much. It's terrible. I hate social media. I'm so bad at it. But the so you can find us there as well. We're on major platforms, just not TikTok, because I don't understand that whole thing.
I got you. Cool. Well, I'll make sure to put those details in the info. And thanks again, Tyler. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. All right. Yes. Thanks a lot, Tyler. That was pretty cool.
Good.
Besides the technical difficulties,
No worries.
you are a treasure trove of information.
I talk a lot, so there's bound to be stuff.
Yeah. Oh, actually, let's plug North Star. I'll edit that back in there.
Okay.
So, hey, Tyler, I know you said, let me start that over.
It's okay.
Tyler, tell us a little bit about North Star Liberty Group and how you guys help people. And if anybody wants to hire your company, how would they go about that?
Yeah, you can just reach out to us via our website, or you can just reach out to me directly on the email list or the email address I provided. We do, like I said earlier, we do a whole host of things related to cannabis. If you're an existing business, you want to get political, let us know. We really, really, want more people that look like us, people who are from impacted communities, to be political, because every time I walk into a conference room, when I walk into meetings, I'm one of the very few people of color in those meetings. We need more of our voices, and we are ready to represent our voices in the hills of, or in the halls of Congress, or state legislatures, anything like that. If you're trying to get into business, you can reach out to us. We definitely do some business consulting as well, and help to do applications. And we have lost out on clients because we've been too honest with them. People sometimes want to hear what we don't think is going to be what we don't think is going to work, and we've been in this space for long enough that we usually know what's going to work and what's not going to work. So we will always be open and honest with you. If you have an idea, if you want to get involved in some way, we are happy to talk to you.
That's awesome. And are you regional or are you nationwide?
Nationwide. We have specialties in the Northeast and federal, but we've worked with people across the country, from California to Massachusetts. So yeah, we're open to any and all things.
Great. No, guys, make sure you hit up Tyler and North Star Liberty Group. Tyler, I want to say thanks again for joining us. It's been real.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.